is Salon, and it's past 4:30 p.m. in Adelaide, South Australia. It's a beautiful cloudy day. By the way, I ran my first marathon today. It was beautiful. I didn't take any water breaks. I didn't stop. I had a cold today morning. I told my friend that I didn't feel like it, but I ran anyways, and it was a really mind blowing experience to go beyond what you're capable of, right? Usually, it takes me an hour to complete 10 kilometers, but today I ran 21.1 kilometers in 1 hour 40 minutes around that time. So it's really interesting because it's so paradoxical, right? Because if I it took me a longer time to cover 10K as compared to covering 21K, and that is really interesting, probably because when the distance is short you take your time. That's the Parkinson's law, right? The work expands to the time that is assigned to it. That is the Parkinson's law. I think that is something I learned today. It's really interesting. I got to experience it firsthand today, right? uh, you know what, there are other experiences too in academics also. Let's say if you have one day before the deadline, you get most of the work done in that one day as compared to the 4 weeks that you had with you before the deadline really approached. So that is something that we can really probably rectify, and which will instill more peace in our life, right? Because you don't want to be anxious all of a sudden. No one likes that state of unrest. Well, I have a different approach to anxiety anyway. I'll probably discuss that later. All right, so I got to go through a couple of chapters, a few chapters from the book of Genesis, and it's something that equates to the strength of character that can probably change a society. What do I mean by that? Well, the story is there were a couple of cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, and the Lord had heard the complaints about these two cities because apparently these cities were doing ungodly things, right? It was they were straying away from God. Okay, so he visited Abraham along with his angels. So there were three men in total: the Lord and two of his angels. So there were three men, right? So Abraham was a person who loved living things. So he was upset when he heard that the Lord was going to destroy both of the cities, and he asked the Lord, "What if God, what if Lord, my Lord, if you found 50% who were righteous?" Yes, and the Lord said, "No, I will destroy." And then he kept on asking him until he asked. Abraham asked the Lord that, okay, what if you find only 10 men who are righteous? The Lord said, okay, you know what, I'm not going to destroy them. And then the Lord went his way. Well, that is really interesting because probably it only takes one person to create that ripple which spreads into the society and changes it, right? Because I went to Delhi this time, and I used to go run in the park in 40 degrees, really hot by the way. And what happened was usually people don't give way to each other in the park, like they would take their space. It's a bit different as compared to Australia, right? And what happened was I just started going around them, and I used to run for an hour in that park, and I actually didn't intrude their private space. I would just go around them. So eventually they realized that, okay, you know what, we need to give this person this space. Well, when I changed my approach, the number of people who were in that park, who were on the same track on which I was running, they also changed their behavior. And that was really interesting to see. I wasn't expecting that. Right. So now the angels visited Sodom, and Sodom was where Abraham's nephew was living. And if you remember, his nephew's name was Lot. And you know, when the angels were residing at Lot's place for the night, the people of that city actually surrounded Lot's house and then asked him to release those men so they can deal with them carnally. And it's really interesting because if those because those persons who were staying at Lot's house were angels of God, right? It is really interesting for men to gather against those because you see that all the time, right? You Because angels are beings who transcend humans. They are an ideal, and probably the citizens were jealous of those angels and they wanted to get rid of them so that they can destroy the ideal and the citizens can just go on living their lives, right? Because you meet people like that, they're jealous and all they want to do, or if they get the chance, they'll try and destroy the person who stands as an ideal in front of them. Or the better approach is to try and aim for the same things that your ideal does. And probably that is the meaning of the must was a student, right? Because you have to start somewhere and then you can just move towards your ideal, right? And that's the whole pursuit of goal in human life. Yes. All right. So now the angels asked Lord and his family to leave their house and go to the mountains. And then Lord said, okay, you know what? There's a city nearby. Can we go there? And the angels said, okay. All right. And the lords had and the angels had warned Lord and his family that do not look back when we are destroying the city, because once you leave, you're gonna destroy the city, this current city, that's Sodom. Please do not look back. Okay, so Lord's family leaves and his wife, Lord's wife, she looks back and she turns into pillar of salt. Well, that's really interesting too. Well, why would you turn into a salt of pillar if you looked back into the burning city? That's the victim's mentality, I'd say, right? Because I've met people who still don't let go of their past and they are still stuck there. A lot of them is still stuck there and they're really salty about what happened with them in the past. And that's not a benefit to anyone. My approach is, well, how do you rectify that? What I usually think that everything that happens with me is because of my fault, and it's not an easy thing to contend with because it's easy to get bitter. But the best advantage of that way of thinking for me is that I can control what I do. I cannot control what someone else does. I cannot spend my human time to rectify someone else. It's way more, let's say you don't know what the result would be. It is there's a the chances of changing that person would be way lower, right? but you got but you have all the control on yourself, right? So if you are the person who can control themselves and their actions, it's way easier to do that, and it's much more beneficial, and it's easier to not blame the other person and blame the other person and tell them that the evil still exists because you didn't change your behavior. I don't think that benefits anyone. So that is basically the victim's mentality, and the way out of it is not easy. That is the adoption of accountability and responsibility for everything that happens to you. And it's not, and it's something that can easily turn people bitter. But it is good to keep in mind that you are in control of yourself and you can change what you do. It is way easier for you to control your actions, and probably that's good enough, and every conscious effort that goes towards it shall take you towards that leads you towards a better life. And that's it from me. Thank you.